we're able to see those two assistants we saw. If I just say implement sort to this data science and machine learning assistant, it's going to do it in Python. It's going to do it in the context of this custom AI code assistant. If I switch over to the Elastic Search Assistant and say implement sort, not only is it going to do it in Java, but it's going to do it in Elasticsearch, right? And so this is a very simple example, but you can start to see the power.
Welcome back to another episode of DevAI. Today we are exploring something every developer is thinking about right now: AI coding assistants, and who's really in control. My guest is Ty, CEO and founder of Continue, a fast-growing open-source AI code assistant that integrates right inside your IDE and gives you way more control than traditional tools like Copilot. We'll talk about why he's betting on custom, user-controlled, open-source AI IDE code assistants and what makes Continue unique, and how it could shape the future of developer workflows, from coding suggestions to intelligent context to the earlier steps toward autonomy. Thanks much for joining today.
Thank you, Balaji. Appreciate the invite.
Absolutely. And why don't you give me a quick intro about yourself? What do you do? Any background you want to share with us?
Yeah, of course. My name is Ty. I'm a co-founder of Continue, and I guess I've been in the AI, ML, NLP space for about a decade. I got very interested in conversational AI out of university and worked in that space for a while. And this was kind of pre-large language model, but it was right at the time as early neural networks and recurrent neural networks were being applied within organizations, and recommender systems were really coming online and becoming quite powerful. And so I got really deep into that and ended up becoming the first product manager at an open source conversational framework company by the name of Raza. And so our product had millions of downloads, was used by about 10% of the Fortune 500. And I think at the time had like 17,000 GitHub stars, which was a lot back in the day. These days, it doesn't feel like very much, but I got to basically get ML and data infrastructure into places like JP Morgan Chase and Deutsche Telekom. And it really taught me kind of what it takes to kind of build an open source, commercial open source startup, as well as like how to kind of serve the enterprise. And in addition, we were doing research with OpenAI at the time. So I got to see GPT-2 become GPT-3, and I got to see kind of the early Da Vinci model, GPT-3 Da Vinci. We were fine-tuning that model to be a user simulator that would talk to our supervised machine learning dialogue management system. And so it became really clear to me at that point in the early 2020s that large language models were going to change how we did work, and specifically for people who do work where you're manipulating a lot of text, which software engineering ends up being a place where we manipulate a lot of text. And so I got very interested in that problem. And then GitHub Copilot came out, and I got to play with codecs in the early days. I was generating Raza SDK Python code, and I'm like, oh, this is super cool, and just began using it in work and in side projects, and allowed me to basically spend a lot of time thinking about where I thought the future of the space would evolve.
Awesome. My undergraduate project was also a neural network speech recognition, and then it went quiet for a while. So like nobody was interested, or nobody was really able to
Exactly.
monetize it, and then now it's back again. Anyhow, so let's get into it. There are lots of commercial tools out there. Every day there's something new coming up: Copilot, Cursor, Windsurf, Amazon Q, etc. I want you to do a quick 30 seconds on what is Continue and who is it for.
Yep, definitely. So Continue enables folks to create, share, and use custom AI code assistants. And I think that's kind of where we differ from other people. We kind of believe the future, especially in large organizations, is finding a way to make these AI code assistants. And I think increasingly AI native development, even outside of the IDE and other places throughout the software development lifecycle, have the ability to capture a lot of like the tribal knowledge, a lot of the implicit things that haven't been made explicit about how you do things, what your idioms are, what your patterns are, those kind of things. And in order to enable that, we believe in a future that's an open architecture, where I would make the argument that many of those other tools are kind of taking a closed architecture approach. And so we believe in a future where developers are amplified, and that comes from the fact that they're going to be kind of creating and shaping and plugging in many different tools, similar to kind of the last wave where you had GitHub, GitLab, Red Hat, all these kind of platforms that then kind of plugged in many other tools like PagerDuty and Datadog and all of those things. I think the future of AI native development looks a lot more like that. In order to enable that, we need an open architecture. And so that's what Continue is building towards. And the reason for that open architecture is we all have a different definition of great software, and we want our AI native development to reflect that. And I think you need custom AI code assistants to be able to do that. So we're very focused on enabling that, where many folks are just trying to build kind of the best possible, what I would characterize as generic assistant.
So why open source?
Yeah, that's a great question. We didn't start off open source when we were first kind of working on side projects. At the time, GitHub Copilot was an awesome product, but all it had was kind of the tab autocomplete at the time. It had no kind of GitHub Copilot chat or anything else. And kind of the core frustration, even though we loved GitHub Copilot, was that you couldn't change it. There was obvious ways it could have been better. Maybe it completes a line and uses a new library, but at the time it wouldn't like import that library at the top of the file. And we're like, oh, it should do that. And we want to make it do that, but you can't do it because it's a closed architecture. And so then I don't know, we would have had that language at the time, but you couldn't do it. So we're like, what if we built one where you could do something like where you could change it, you could shape it, you could make it. And so we just started like we were using kind of the larger large language models than the smaller one for autocomplete in a more copy paste fashion. We're like, oh, why don't we move this into the IDE? And that's where like Continue really began, where we were very focused on kind of the early days of pulling in kind of what we now do as like kind of chat and edit, and more recently agent mode, where you're kind of very much going beyond kind of just the auto completing of a line or a couple lines to taking larger operations on top of your code base using large language models, and how would those interfaces work. And so it started off with that core frustration. And then as we started to kind of go further down this, if we were going to enable customization, then it was key, right, that we would be open. And there's kind of variations of open, right? And so as we started to go there, we realized that like, making the extensions, which I'll characterize as the clients, open source, really enabled a large adoption. So a good example is like IBM Red Hat now has the Granite Code project, which is a distribution of Continue, right? And they were able to do that because it's Apache 2.0 licensed. And what we're now able to do basically is drive more of a standard on the client interface side. And then what that opens up for us is the opportunity to build a complementary business, which is figuring out what that kind of server that goes along with this client, as well as many other clients. We're going to get into this around the hub and speak to that in more depth. But the open source allowed us to basically say like, hey, instead of building a closed thing and launching it like GitHub Copilot did, let's build an open thing. Let's build a community around it. Let's have a developer focused thing. Let's build trust by making an Apache 2.0 license open source thing. Let's have a bright line test that anything that is for the individual developer, that's single player, that's on their machine, that's kind of user controlled, let's make that open source. And then anything that's multiplayer, that's for the organization, for teams that layer on top of that open source client, what I'll characterize again as like the server, let's have that be kind of the way that we monetize. And of course, people don't necessarily have to use the hub server that we offer. They can also build one themselves and just participate in kind of the same standard client interface. So that's kind of the approach for open source. Eventually, it led down this route of the open architecture that really differentiates us from other tools.
So I guess it looks like it started with the developers need to customize sort of the primary pain point you're trying to solve. And so what do you think is a value from an enterprise point of view? Let's say there's an organization of 10,000 developers. Like how do you envision, would they roll out a custom certified assistant within the enterprise based on your technology? Is that how you envision it?
Exactly, right. But like for them to do it, it's probably not one custom AI code assistant. They want a default one, and they want to make sure they're not passing out API keys, and they want governance over if we're going to let everybody build a custom AI code assistant, what are they allowed to do? What are they not allowed to do? What kind of analytics are we layering on top? All of these kind of things become questions in large organizations that maybe you don't face as a single developer working on a side project outside of work.
What's some of the personalization that the individual developer can do with Continue? Like obviously they can select a model. What else you can sort of?
Yeah, we're going to get into this in the demo in a little bit, but kind of at a high level, right? Like what compromises a custom AI code assistant today is first 6 blocks. So models, data, context. It's always hard to list all of them. MCP servers, docs, and prompts. I think I covered all of them. We'll see them in the demo if I missed one. And so models like are kind of the different roles that they play. Some are autocomplete, some are edit, some are apply. We'll kind of get into what those look like. Then you have rules where you can kind of write down what are the things that the model should always follow. It's super important for kind of the agent mode. Prompts, like where you're really helping your team kind of learn how to prompt, but like basically making these as kind of conversation starters or things that you commonly do, like your unit tests, like you want to be able to take an action and have that described. Data allows you to send all of your data to one central place, to be able to build dashboards on top of it, to be able to fine tune models. I think most people are familiar with MCP. So lots of folks are creating MCP servers, which is critical for kind of the agent mode to be able to take advantage of taking actions and getting data from the real world. Docs allow you to pull in any kind of doc site and have that be used as context, which is really critical when models don't have the latest version of Next.js that you're using and you want to pull in kind of the latest version to help it maybe give you suggestions that are good. So those are the main blocks we have today, and those like compromise the custom AI code assistant. But the reason for kind of pushing a standard format, config.yaml, kind of an agent file almost, is so that we can always iterate on what those blocks might be and change them as AI capabilities improve.
I mean, it looks like you guys were able to add agentic capabilities recently. I think that's something I think was sort of initially missing maybe a month ago or 2 months ago, or whatever, when I looked at it.
Yeah, we actually have had it since October, November, but we just have
Okay.
not, we didn't call it agent. And a lot
Okay.
of folks are very excited about agent. So we
Got
were
it.
calling
Yeah.
it tools, and it was more hidden. And so more recently, you're exactly right. In the last month or so, we've documented it as agent, we've called it agent mode. And so as a result, more folks are finding it and finding success with it.
You're full in. So anybody using Continue will get the full agentic capabilities.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome. That's great. And I think there's another point I want to talk about is what makes Continue fundamentally different in how it interacts with code. I think one thing I've heard is the context aware. How deep is your context compared to other tools, or maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah. So to answer your question, that's a great question. The difference between us and many other tools, right, is they kind of have this closed architecture approach. So it's hard to necessarily compare and contrast with many of them because we're not sure the way in which they're context aware. And this is where it's key to be open source, because developers really want to understand that because it affects kind of how they use the system. And so by being able to go into the code, have really clear documentation about how continuous context works is a really strong plus for us. And then in terms of like, how are we context aware? I think we realized in the beginning that you don't want to automatically insert context on behalf of the user without one making it transparent, and generally at all, unless they start to get comfortable and that it's reliable enough. Because if you like, this has been common for me in my journey with conversational AI, is like people go try to use a chatbot with a company, right? And if it fails in any kind of way, then they churn, right? Or they immediately ask, give me a human, right? And the same is true for kind of these interfaces inside the IDE. If you attempt to inject context and one, don't make them aware of it, or two, even if you do and it doesn't work, they get frustrated and they churn, right? They would rather kind of have that chat GPT experience in the beginning where it's very clear that it's just the messages I'm sending that are being used as context. And then you start to give them kind of tools that allow them to do operations like, let me add the docs as context. Let me add the code base. Let me use this prompt. Let me go add some rules. And they start to kind of build up this trust in the system. And then as that happens, what happens is you kind of initially start with this ability to manually add context yourself, and then you increasingly start to trust the system. And then we start to add more context aware things where, like, for example, we have a local RAG system that will index these docs and make those as part of the context, or kind of MCP is a great way for context to be added, where the agent will go and ask you before it takes action if you want, or if you give it permission, it'll automatically run, go retrieve context. But it's very much about kind of our principle is don't automate in the beginning, allow manual in the beginning, automate as you build trust, and always, I mean, what you see is what you get. So it's very clear that what's happening. Actually, Red Hat, IBM just contributed Continue console. So there's a little flag you can now put on Continue where you can actually go and what is the terminal inside of VS Code and look at a very deep level, kind of what are the calls that are being made and what context is being passed, in addition to kind of what you see in the IDE extension as well.
Awesome. Yeah, the context definitely is very important. Let's say talk about one more thing. There's a growing number of open source AI coding tools as well, and I've come across Klein. So how do you think Continue is different from something like Klein?
Definitely. Klein's a great product. I've played with it myself and actually mentioned it in our Continue 1.io blog post along many others. So I think like LLM from Simon Willison's great, Aider, Tabby, OpenHands, Goose from Block, AI Dev, E2B, Cody from Sourcegraph, Daytona, Sketch. Like all of these tools, I think from my point of view, explain that like really show the value of custom AI code assistants and like how we need them to not just exist in the IDE in one way, but in many ways, and even outside of the IDE in many ways, right? And that the very fact that you have a lot of early pioneers creating all of these early developer tools show the degree to which the situations and the requirements and the way that developer environments work is so different and varies so much across so many different organizations and smaller teams and even individual people that we need many tools. And so I love that Klein has the shared vision, as far as I understand, about the open architecture, and it's going to be critical that, I mean, not just Continue, but that many people believe in this. And I think, I mean, we know that the open architecture will win in the long run. And we're at the very early beginnings, right, of what I believe to be probably a multi-decade transition that will ultimately lead to the open architecture winning. And just because, as we've both experienced, I think open wins or tends to win on a long enough time horizon.
And absolutely, I think you guys are definitely leading, in many areas in terms of, doing the open source way. And I think that's why I wanted to talk to you today. Let's talk about that. Now, this is my favorite part. Obviously, now I want you to do a quick walkthrough for folks who haven't tried Continue. So maybe I think you're using VS Code to show it, but yeah, let's.
Let's do it. So I'm going to push the button to present screen. I'm going to share the entire screen, and we're going to start off in, oops, we're going to start off in the hub to give people a sense of what custom AI code assistants are. So you can go pretty deep and quite varied with them, but the easiest way to understand it in the beginning is I want a custom assistant because I use Next.js and we use it in a particular way. So maybe a programming language or a framework or a library. In addition, another example of many that we won't go into today would be something like this clean code assistant here, where it helps you kind of follow solid design principles. And so one we actually use on the team after we're done writing code, we use the clean code custom AI code assistant to make sure that we're following kind of the design principles that we want in our code. And so what
Love it.
is a custom AI code assistant, right? So kind of the building blocks we mentioned earlier, right? There's kind of different models that you can use. So they could be from Anthropic or Together or Google or Mistral. And what we're attempting to do is make it as easy as just click add block and you can begin using. And so today we're going to make the demo super simple. I've put together a little demo org with two custom AI code assistants so you can kind of see them in action. And so I've got a Java Elasticsearch assistant. And if I switch here, we'll have a data science and machine learning assistant. And they have different rules. They have different docs that are associated with them. If I switch to the Elastic Assistant, they have different prompts. So here I don't have any prompts, but they have different context data. This is being sent to Azure Blob Store and memory. And so if I jump into Open VS Code, um, like that. We don't need to worry about the Azure piece today. We can see that we're now inside of VS Code. I've gone and installed with one click continue, and I've now got it in my sidebar. What I did is I logged in, selected my demo org, and now we're able to see those two assistants we saw. And so
Mhm.
a very easy way to understand like what is the power of custom AI code assistants is if I just say like implement sort to this data science and machine learning assistant, right? It's going to do it in Python, right? It's going to do it in the context of this custom AI code assistant. And I didn't have to give it all that instruction and say, do it in Python, right? Versus if I switch over to the Elastic Search Assistant and say implement sort, it's going to do it in Java. And not only is it going to do it in Java, but it's going to do it in Elasticsearch, right? And so this is a very simple example, but you can start to see the power of like, if we do Elasticsearch in a very specific way at my organization, you can start to put in the different building blocks. And so in this notch top bar, right, we can see those different models and the different model roles, and I'm able to switch between them. So maybe I like to use Claude 3.7 Sonnet for chat, and for edit, I like to use Claude 3.5 Sonnet, and different things for different models. And if we go here, we can look at the rules, right? This is a very simple example, but it says, hey, follow the Java coding standards, avoid using raw types, and use the Elasticsearch Java SDK instead of JSON whenever possible. And as you start to get into that and realize how much like a lot of decisions were made about how you use Elasticsearch or any technology, rules become really important. When I'm using Elasticsearch Java Assistant, I want to be able to also reference the Java docs or the Kibana docs. I want to be able to have different tools and MCP servers. And so if I switch over to the data science and machine learning assistant, we can kind of look at the kind of top use cases of Continue now that I've given you this thing. So the first is this chat mode here. We've seen that already, but I can kind of switch to this edit mode. And if I go to maybe this, let's say generate.py, what I can do is maybe find somewhere that has something that maybe I want to edit. We have the traditional kind of autocomplete that people are used to. So if I add like an assert statement here, it allow me to basically autocomplete. So we have that feature. So if I now highlight this code and I say I want to add this file to be edited, so generate.py, and I say like make these variable names more human readable because I have no idea what these letters mean. Edit will go and it's going to kind of enhance it. And so it's going to give me an edit here. What I can now do is I can hit apply. It's going to apply that section here and kind of give me a diff that allows me to then accept or reject. So we've seen the autocomplete, we've seen the edit, we've seen the chat. it's powered by this custom AI code assistant. If I now say switch over to this Java Elasticsearch assistant, I'll show agent mode. So good example here is I've added an MCP server for memory. And so if I click on that, I can actually go look at it in the hub. And so it's from Anthropic. It's one of their example. It's a knowledge graph persistent memory. Uh, and so I've connected it to agent mode inside of Continue, and I can tell it something like add that my name is Ty to your memory. And what it's going to do is it's going to say, hey, I would like to use the memory create entities tool. I can press continue because I've got this setting on where I don't want it to automatically take actions. I want it to check in with me, but you could also set that up to be automatic. It looks like it added Ty to that. And so then I can say, check your memory for my name, and let's see if it's able to figure out what my name is. So it's going to try and read from that knowledge graph, and it was able to remember my name is Ty. So very, very simple example, but there's really powerful MCPs for GitHub and for Notion and for many different tools that you can use with agent mode. And so very quick summary of Continue, but you can create these different custom AI code assistants, and then depending on the models you choose, depending on the rules, depending on the docs, depending on the prompts, tools, and MCP servers, how they work inside of autocomplete, chat, edit, and agent will differ. And the idea is to make them very custom to your code base and your organization.
Awesome. Thanks. That's a great demo. You're showing this just a minute ago, which is on the Continue Hub. So kind of like a Docker hub for AI developer assistance, looks like. So what's the vision
Exactly.
behind that? And
Yeah, so it's like very similar to the it's the server thing we were talking about earlier, right? Where we believe that like it needs to be frictionless to create these custom AI code assistants. So previously we had a config YAML file that you had to go edit manually, and it was hard and difficult for people. And so for most developers, right, they just want to be able to click add assistant, and it just adds all of the blocks, or they want to add the blocks, but want to be able to do it in a GUI. And so having that frictionless experience where there's this free solo tier where anyone can go and contribute the blocks that they find valuable and share them with other people. So we have like different open source projects for like their technology, they're publishing them. We've partnered with people like Anthropic and Docker and Voyage AI and Mistral so that they can have official blocks. So as they update their APIs and update their models, they can make them available. And you don't, all you have to do is go click a button. And then there's kind of a teams and enterprise plan layered on top of it, because when you're an organization, you don't want anybody to be able to use any block from any random person. Like if they were to update it, it could have malicious code and stuff like that. And so kind of the governance, the auditing, the transparent or the credential, secret, security, all of those kind of features are part of the enterprise and teams plan that basically allow you to use the hub within your organization, but kind of set the boundaries, set the conditions that are permissible for your organization. And so it's the server we were talking about earlier, where our VS Code and our JetBrains extensions are just example clients. We're going to be releasing a public SDK API soon that allow you to basically take it and have it in like a CLI Claude Code like experience, have it inside like a chat interface that you have on the web, pull it into your code review, pull it into everywhere across your software development lifecycle, and be able to have this shared custom AI code assistant tribal knowledge all centralized, so that longer term, as you're working in the IDE and doing things, it can have an impact, say, in your CI, right? And as you do things in your CI with AI, it can have an impact on that data can be retrieved from your IDE or while you're working in your IDE.
so you're one of your business models around the enterprise and team subscriptions. So the large enterprise can essentially use it to govern all of these things.
Exactly. Yeah. And many of them want like single sign on. They want to have the control plane and data plane separated, where their sensitive data and their prompts and all of their code and their analytics stays in their environment. Those are kind of examples of early enterprise features that people are quite excited about, and a big reason they
That's
choose that
That's pretty
plan.
awesome, actually. I think this is the first time seeing sort of this ecosystem of like different people are actually contributing, right, to the hub, essentially.
Exactly. Right. And that's, yeah, I mean, they're contributing to the open source, and they're now
Yeah.
contributing in a different way in the hub.
Is there a way to monetize that? I think that for, let's say, I want to contribute an assistant with some special secret sauce or whatever. I guess, do I get to monetize that? Do I need
Yeah,
to,
so today, like it's going to be if you have APIs, right? And so if your
uh,
API has secret, so of course the models,
yeah.
but also things like Greptile, you can plug that into Continue, or Exa, right? These are examples of things where they require an API key in our blocks, and so that's the main way that others in the ecosystem are monetizing. Longer term, we're going to enable folks to maybe have a custom AI code assistant for their dev tool or enable that
Mm-hmm.
to be a paid thing, that maybe you pay for a general subscription for some tool like a Streamlit. There's a Streamlit custom AI code assistant that you get along the way, and just by paying for it, you just OAuth in, connect it, and now Streamlit is able to offer a custom AI code assistant through the Continue ecosystem. So that's more longer term, but basically we want to enable the ecosystem to make a lot of money, and as a result,
Yeah,
right, they'll
that
highly
makes sense. Yeah.
participate, they'll keep things updated, and that's how this can actually become a winning
Yeah.
approach.
Yeah, I really love the vision. So last question for you. So what do you think? What parts of AI tools do developers would prefer to own versus like buying in the long run? Do you think they'll end up using multiple AI assistants for different aspects of the same project? I mean, looks like you're already enabling that.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think it's a spectrum, right? Like we already today have Google and Meta and folks like that creating entirely custom AI code assistants, AI software development platforms entirely from scratch. And so for folks like them with resources and talent and the ability, they're probably always going to create and share everything on their own and maybe internally and not even participate in the ecosystem. But as you kind of go down to many other organizations that don't have as many resources and things like that, or I shouldn't say necessarily down, that are different, right, and have different priorities, right? Many of them, their core competency is not technology like Google and Meta, but they're world classes in baking or construction or other things like that. And so they want to maybe trade their time for money. And so they'll end up buying something and buying components of it. But that's where I think the open architecture really is critical, because at every kind of module of this system that you're creating, similar to what you do today, it's always going to be that build buy decision. And in some cases you'll build, in some cases you'll buy, but you'll be able to shape your system because at a minimum you'll be able to decide kind of the different tools and technologies you're going to use versus buying one solution that's a black box that is vertically integrated, that doesn't show you where your data is going and gives you no choice. And there's a fundamental piece here that goes to our mission. And this is probably a good place for us to end if this is the last question, where if we think about like in the future, like if we're 2 decades into this AI native development and many other folks who are self-proclaimed last piece of software or AI software engineer or superhuman AI software engineer, like where does this profession go? Like that sounds like all of us automating our jobs away, which I don't even know if it's technically feasible given the technology. But even if it is, I believe in a future where developers are amplified, not automated. And what that means, I think, in the long run is even if technology gets really good, there's a place for human engineers to monitor. Maybe it's like Hacker News, where all they do is sit around a table and kind of argue about where to point the system next or what preferences to put into the system. And they don't actually do any of the coding or maybe even the architecting themselves, but they're kind of basically building the system that builds the system and monitoring the system that builds the software that they power at their organization. And so I think the open architecture is really critical for the future of software development and the profession of being a software engineer or related fields.
Absolutely. I had a previous episode around this topic is like, what do the developers do now, right? Now that they're coding less and less, and maybe you're going 20 years out, and that's like, I don't even, guess what's going to happen 20 years from now.
Yeah, by no means am I making predictions here, but I'm just trying to think through at a fundamental level where what do we want? We have agency here, right, as developers to decide what tools we use and what future we're building. And so when we put our money towards people and our time towards people and our energy, our tweets towards products, right, that are saying that they're going to automate us away, like that's going to probably make that future more likely to happen versus if we decide to vote with our time and our resources towards a future and tools that are in a direction we like, that's going to be more likely to happen. The profession isn't just going to evolve. We're going to have a say in how it evolves.
Excellent. All right. On that note, thanks so much for coming on. This was super thoughtful look at what the future of developer tooling is going to look like. To everyone watching, would you rather use a closed source AI assistant, or the one you can control, customize, maybe even run yourself? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and as always, like, subscribe, stay tuned for more from Dev AI. Thank you, Ty, for coming on. Appreciate
Yeah,
your
thank
time.
you, Balaji. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.